Every show feels like a big show, but this one feels particularly big because we're in the business of overreacting to an actual regular season game. Everything that could have gone wrong for the Mets on opening night, other than Jacob DeGrom, seemingly did. We'll discuss that. Plus, it seems like forever ago, but Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson spoke to the media. We'll discuss that and revisit the extensions for everybody segment that we do every week. The Shea Anything Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome everybody. Subscribe, rate, and review to the Shea Anything Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate it once again. Weeknights at 6 o'clock is baseball night in New York. You can catch both of us on that show. We were on at a little early, our early time at 5:30 yesterday before opening day. We felt like there was a lot of optimism. We discussed Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson and what they said to the media. We'll get to that in a second. And then the game happened. And, what's interesting, Andy, is you were on the couch with me, and Jeff wants us to do designated Twitter in our rundown today. And I had my kind of Twitter rant about Dom Smith not being in the lineup. And a lot of times those conversations die out, like they go away as soon as the first pitch happens. But it could not have been more of a precursor to what the night would look like, because there was so much to dissect about the Mets on opening night. But the fact that Dom Smith didn't get into the game, it's really fascinating. Where do you want to start with opening night? Like, what did you think was the biggest takeaway?
Well, we could go in sequential order, I guess, if you want, because you mentioned the Dom Smith lineup decision, which I am in agreement with you on. I don't think that the matchup decision is as relevant on day one when there are emotional components to it. We talked on BNNY last week about why Aaron Boone played Gary Sanchez on opening day, why he paired him with Garrett Cole and not Kyle Higashioka. Higashioka gives Cole a somewhat better chance of success, but it's opening day. Sanchez is your guy. You're not going to embarrass him. And Terry Collins is on the show. He completely agreed with us when we discussed that. You don't embarrass your big guy on opening day. And by sitting Smith, Rojas ran the risk of that. Definitely understand the logic about the defensive move for DeGrom. But as a colleague of ours said, I won't out him because he didn't say it publicly, but said to us in the studio yesterday, when was the last time Jacob DeGrom's defense cost him the win? It's the lack of offense that usually hurts him. So I didn't like that decision. I think it would have made perfect sense in DeGrom's next turn, but opening day is a special day. Dom Smith has earned the right to play it. All I'm doing is repeating what you said yesterday, which I completely agree with, but I don't agree with what Rojas did on that one.
Yeah, it really didn't make sense to me in a lot of ways. I mean, Pilar, okay, you want to put him in the game, batting him leadoff seems strange. And then you could make the case that Dom should have been in there instead of Nimmo. But again, I just think is it really the game to let the matchups dictate what you do? No, Dom Smith has done everything for you, including accept a bench role and thrive in it 2 years ago. Learn a new position when he's better at his original one than Pete Alonso. And then this is just insult to injury for him. I didn't like it. Then in the fourth inning, Pilar comes up with the bases loaded. And, it is the fourth inning, but you had chased Matt Moore from the game. There's a right-handed reliever on the mound. Dom Smith made sense as a pinch hitter. They don't do it. Pilar grounds into a double play. And so I think big picture, Andy, I mean, we could go through the entire game because it's that interesting.
Let's do those two, though. Let's do, because I think that one, that moment was interesting, and then the decision to leave DeGrom in was interesting. So if you don't mind, let's go through those three.
Okay. So
you mentioned the decision not to pinch hit.
Okay. So yeah, let's do the three batter rule, and we'll start with the fourth inning pinch hit decision. The whole reason, and Todd Zeile made this point on postgame, the whole reason that Pilar was in the game, and you just mentioned it too, was the matchups, right? So that's what we were told by Rojas before the game. It's the fourth inning. You have a right-handed reliever on the mound. The matchup's gone. The defense will get worse by you putting Dom in the game as a pinch hitter in that spot. But again, your reasoning doesn't hold up anymore. So why isn't Dom Smith in the game in that situation? Doesn't it make sense to try and blow it open? Because if you had, then the bullpen wouldn't have blown it for DeGrom.
I think that logic dictates probably making that move, but pinch hitting Smith for Pilar would probably be the thing to do there. But I am having trouble getting too worked up about this one as much as some others are. I think that I can see both sides of it. You have a 2-run lead. That's when you tighten up your defense, not when you make it worse. I understand. So there's that. Point. Now, the obvious counter to that is you could have a 4-run lead if Dom comes in and gets a big hit. So it's a tight game because you let Pilar hit. I get that too, but this is a non-scientific answer. But how many times have we seen the manager make the right matchup decision in a pinch hitting move? The big hitter comes in, rolls one over. Now he's burned. Now your defense is worse. Still 2-0. I feel like that's what would have happened. That's what happened.
I know.
I've ever heard time. And someone suggested, one of the reporters post game, like, well, you could have put Almora in for defense if that was still your concern, and pinch hit Dom. And I accept what Rojas said. Burn 2 bench players in the 4th inning is not ideal. So, look, should he have pinch hit? Probably. Am I hot and bothered about it? No.
Well, here's the funny thing, Andy. It would be one thing if this was like the player the Mets fan base loved, like the bench player that they want to start, the backup quarterback that a fan base always, for some reason, thinks is better than their starter. But Dom Smith is like one of your best hitters. Yeah, so the fact that we're having this conversation is not an overreaction, because Jonathan Villar, Kevin Pilar, and Luis Guillorme got into the game last night, and Dom Smith didn't. And it's opening night. Yeah. So it's just strange.
He should have started, and there shouldn't be a conversation. How about that?
100%. So again, it's just, in my opinion, malpractice to not get him in the game. And in that situation, you could have blown it open. And look, I think to say that Dom Smith on night 1 is not in the game and not allowed in the game in the 4th inning because of his defense is, if nothing else, a blow to his confidence.
Well, and one thing I'll say, look, I agree with you overall about starting. And one thing that I'll say, and it's why I get hesitant about criticizing some of these things over the course of all the years I've been covering baseball, is because it's Rojas's job to have a feel for the player. So it's entirely possible that he just knew that all he had to do was call Dom up and be like, here's the deal. And Dom would be like, all right, cool. And maybe he's like, that's a guy I can sell this to, and there is no issue. And Dom and Rojas are both going to download Shea Anything later in the day when it's published and be like, these guys have no freaking clue how this actually landed. That's possible. So I want to say that.
How it lands is dependent on the player.
That's what I'm saying. And
but it's not Dom Smith's fault that he's probably a team player and a nice guy and willing to accept that, and not a superstar with a huge ego that wouldn't handle that well. Just because he can handle it does not make it right.
No, but I'm saying that our criticism of it has largely been based on Smith doesn't deserve the disrespect. And we're saying that we don't know for a fact that that's how it played inside Dom Smith's heart. We just don't know. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. And
I agree with you overall, but I'm just making that sort of small counterpoint.
If they had faced Max Scherzer, and they were supposed to, and Dom was starting at first base and Pete Alonso was on the bench, is there a world where you see that happening?
No, probably not, because Alonso somehow has kept his position as ahead of Dom on the depth chart, despite the way last year went. Clearly, the situation of Dom revolves around Alonso still. Might not once there's a DH. Then we have a different conversation with Pete saying, I'm not a DH, and manager being like, yes, you are. And then that's a whole thing, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to the ups, which is, the age old
ups. How many times in your life have we been discussing a game and it just all comes down to the ups?
It really is
That's
all
a big
about the
baseball
ups.
thing.
A lot of fans actually in the stands have the pitch count tracker, but instead of pitches, they punch it for the ups.
They count the ups. It's very tiring to stand up and sit down.
So, okay, this is complicated. DeGrom gets removed early, and after the game seemed not just on board with it. He didn't give the classic, like, yeah, I would have loved to stay out there, but it's our decision. He gave the, like, almost sense of relief that he felt okay about it. And the way that Anthony Recker described it in postgame was great. It was like the warranty in a car commercial, 10 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. So for DeGrom, it was innings or pitch count or ups. It was basically ups. So he was asked, okay, what if you had gone 100 pitches? He was like, I wouldn't have been able to get there. It would have been in the fourth inning. He was like, I was actually relieved to be able to go 6. So DeGrom's on board. The Mets fan base is not. And it's not really like with DeGrom, it's a different conversation. Like, it's very easy for us, Andy, to be like, why don't starting pitchers go deeper into games? He's just so obviously the best that you really just wonder, like, why in any situation would you want any pitcher to be on the mound other than him unless you absolutely have to?
Well, a couple things about that. Number one, he doesn't want to be in the game. So that's the end of the story.
That's true. That's why I tried to make that point.
Number two, it worked out perfectly, that move. Perfectly. Miguel Castro pitches as well in the 7th as DeGrom could possibly. He doesn't give up any runs. So, okay, this is why this decision strategically is a no-brainer, right move for Rojas. Because if DeGrom pitches 7, you're going to arrested Trevor May in the 8th. You're skipping Castro, right? That's what he would have done. Trevor May blows it either way. Like, right? Trevor May was the GOAT with a lot of help from Aaron Loop. So Castro pitching the 7, like, it was either DeGrom to May or DeGrom Castro to May. It worked out fine. It worked out perfectly.
Right.
And so that was that. So it wasn't the quick hook on DeGrom that led to any of the bullpen misadventures. And the other thing I want to say about this is that there's this weird thing that happens among fans and a lot of reporters sometimes too, which is assuming that the great starting pitcher is some cowboy who, like, you have to take the ball from his cold, dead hands. There were questions to Rojas last night, like, Louis, DeGrom is such a competitor. How hard was it? And meanwhile, everyone's like, the conversation seemed to go like, Jake, you done? Yeah, I'm done. Okay, good job. It's like, people talk about Scherzer like this too. Oh, you can't get Scherzer out of a game. He fought it like once ever that I've ever seen. Like, these guys aren't like the kind of tough guy. I'm actually complimenting them. It may not sound like it, but they're not like stupid. Like, leave me in the game. I'm a cowboy. I'm tough. They want to come out of the game.
It's Matt Harvey 2015. Like that is the worry that, you have a starting pitcher that is begging to stay in.
It doesn't have. When has Jacob DeGrom ever been like, you're not getting this ball for me? So I was baffled by these questions to Rojas last night, which were like, was it so hard to get Jake to come out of the game? No, he wanted to come out of the game. What is this whole assumption that he won't?
Well, it wasn't just that in the moment he wanted to. It was that it was a pregame plan.
That too.
If you're
but
a
he
fan,
doesn't fight it. Why do people think he's going to?
If you're a fan at home, you're like, why would you plan before a game before it starts? Which, okay, I know they didn't used to do that, but like they do it
strategy now. Yeah,
right. So, I mean, DeGrom's game, Castro pitched well, and Castro's clearly going to be a huge weapon for you, considering he's throwing strikes. So everything was fine, to your point. So I didn't have a huge issue with it. It just looks bad on paper. It's an easy thing to overreact to. But if you listened to DeGrom talk about it, like, he gave a really nuanced answer, which he took a long pause. He was like, well, it's hard because in that situation, it was kind of like what we wanted. Mm-hmm. DeGrom did the opposite of throw his manager under the bus or say he wanted to stay in. He basically made the point that it was what they had planned on doing, and he felt actually relieved to go 6.
It's just amazing how some people build these guys up into myths that aren't real. Like, some people, some fans and even some reporters seem to have built up DeGrom as this person who's like, would fight that, when in fact he's smarter and more rational than that in a situation like this. I don't understand this whole idea that because you're an ace, it means that you won't come out of the game. It's just stupid, but go on.
Okay, so the bullpen, which we've alluded to, and then the Guillorme play. Guillorme's in for defense. That's the irony of it all. And Keith during the game, I thought he did a great explanation. They took the camera shot of the booth and he got up out of his chair. Rec described it from the catcher perspective in post game. So I don't know if I'm qualified to tell you if Guillorme or McCann was at fault. But the May and Loop situation is not something I feel comfortable overreacting to. I just know, again, to try and discuss this, knowing how Mets fans feel, what's changed, right? DeGrom pitches great. The team doesn't give him run support. He actually has their first hit of the season at the plate. The bullpen comes in and Trevor May and Aaron Loop blows the lead for him. DeGrom gets a no decision. The Mets lose. So for the Met fan out there, Andy, they are like, the formula has not changed. And again, it's so easy for anybody to tell you, and I'm talking to you, Met fan, listening, so easy for people to be like, don't overreact. It's one game. Don't let anyone tell you that, because it was a particularly uniquely interesting and also painful way to lose, considering this is how your team's been losing with the best pitcher on the world on the hill for years. So it wasn't a heartbreaking walk-off home run, bitter loss, we're overreacting. It was a uniquely Mets way to lose. And I get it if you're going to freak out about that loss.
Well, look, an opening day is going to be picked over more than we're going to get into a routine where there's going to be a game every day and they're going to feel less significant. But opening day, emotionally for people, to your point, is one that you've been looking forward to for months and months and months and months. So it sort of gets analyzed like an NFL game or something, right? But there's another one tonight. So it's cool to have an emotional reaction to it. Baseball as a business needs you out there to have an emotional reaction to it. But let's, of course, see how May and Loop look going forward. It was a shame that McCann was a part of that bad defensive play. There were so many plays in Wilson Ramos over the past couple of years, didn't quite do what you'd like a catcher to do. Some plays at the plate and other stuff. I listened to Rec's analysis. It made a lot of sense about creating a lane and how he kind of got caught in between. And then he tried to turn the double play before he fully had control of the throw from Guillorme. So it's too bad that McCann, who came in with a great reputation as a defensive specialist, had that moment, because really Loop, May, and McCann were three reasons to be excited about the front office's offseason, and they were all at fault in this loss. So that, not a great experience for Zach Scott and Sandy Alderson in that regard.
Right. I guess in some ways, Andy, what you just described, McCann, Loop, and May, I'm not overreacting to how they played or pitched. I think predominantly they'll be fine. I guess what I'm saying is that the reaction to this game is not just about it being opening day.
Right.
It's a little bit, it's bigger than that, because obviously there was anticipation because it was postponed and the COVID thing with the Nationals, but also it was about how it went down. Everything that's been going wrong for them for years, even with new ownership, with Sandy Alderson, with these new free agents, with Francisco Lindor, it was the same thing. And I think even if it happened tonight, and tonight being Tuesday night, it would have been a game that we really reacted to because there were so many interesting things to take away from.
I hear you. I think that feeling will be really short-lived. It's a different team. It's a different culture, different ownership. Francisco Lindor is at the center of everything. It's not going to feel like I don't know if it's going to be good or bad this year, but it's obviously going to be different. For one night, maybe it didn't feel that way, but that's going to be a very short-lived feeling.
I think you're right, and I think Mets fans hope you're right. Okay, let's go quickly through the next two things. We have extensions for everybody. We do this every week. We know Lindor got his, and I know it seems like old news. We haven't talked about it on the podcast, have we? Because
I guess not.
Yeah,
life comes at you fast.
Yeah, So I guess I could ask for your thoughts on the deal, Andy, but it really feels like old news at this point. And you and I have talked about it a lot on the air already. So let's spin it forward. I mean, do you see from your reporting right now that as the games progress in the regular season, that Conforto, or as your new reporting dictates, DeGrom, who was spoken to in spring training, you see either of those extensions getting done mid-season?
Probably not. Definitely not DeGrom. Probably not Conforto. In terms of I guess just to put a bow on the Lindor thing, I just think there's very little chance that it's going to turn out to be a good baseball deal. And it's going to be potentially problematic for the Mets many years down the line, but it's still probably something for branding purposes and short-term purposes that they had to do. I don't know if they had to do it, but I understand why they did. To the point you were making before, Doug, you want to talk about same old Mets kind of concept. Okay, the relievers blew a game that DeGrom started, but they spent $341 million on a player also. That puts them in a class that they've never been in before and puts them in a very, very small little upper echelon of teams that would ever consider doing something like that. So that changed their reputation right there. There's almost no way that this works out for them as a baseball operations decision. But that's not what it was.
They could win a couple World Series.
Fair enough. But just in terms of, okay, here's what I mean, narrowly. Thank you for making me clarify. In terms of dollar value to player production over the course of the contract, it will almost certainly be a bad contract. But David Wright's contract with the Mets was horrible, and it's good that they did it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it's beyond the numbers crunching of what's he actually worth. He's not worth what they're paying, but he is in an intangible sense. In a baseball on-field analytical sense, I don't know that any player's worth $30 million a year as one of the 26. And certainly no good roster management consists of committing to someone for 11 years, no matter who they are. Look at Albert Pujols. There's so many more examples than that too. But it was still something that they should have done for the reasons we enumerated. Moving on to the other guys, I think Conforto looks like he'll be a free agent, most likely. DeGrom, next year could be his last season as a Met if they don't take care of that, and that's what they thought about. You know, we uncovered that a little over the weekend. It had been under the radar, but they'd approached DeGrom. The team had some preliminary extension talks to try to preempt that opt-out after next season. Didn't get anywhere. Table it. Not expected to resume during this season. This will be what this report did tell us, though, is that they'll talk about this next season. This will be a hot topic because you're going to snap your fingers and DeGrom's going to be in his walk year. Right. And so they're going to have to decide, but there's going to be some really big numbers getting thrown at them because if you're Jacob DeGrom, you're just looking at Garrett Cole's, salary and probably would be within your rights to stew about it.
That's why he has a new agent.
That's why he has a new agent. Brodie Van Wagenen left the Mets with quite a gift in negotiating that contract for the team. That's a hell of a team-friendly contract with DeGrom's level of production. Brodie also gave them Miguel Castro, which is one of the lone bright spots last night out of the bullpen, obviously.
Along those same lines, we were going to go through what Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson spoke about yesterday. And again, just like us, this was their first time addressing the Francisco Lindor signing, even though it already felt like old news by the time they spoke. But to your point, Andy, about the intangibles of Lindor, Steve Cohen was calling his offer to Lindor a bid. Like, he's that much of a businessman. You can see the stocks on his monitor behind him as he's speaking. So you really get the sense every time you hear from Steve Cohen how much of a businessman he is and how that's his outlook on the Mets. But then he talks about Francisco Lindor, and the way he talks about him is different. It's almost emotional. It is about the person and how, his in-laws are from the same place that he's from. There is something deeper with their relationship that he said they're texting let's listen to what Steve Cohen had to say about Lindor.
Well, generally, I don't think it's a good idea in any situation to say, I'm going to do it no matter what. Okay. I think you have to be disciplined. And, whether I'm buying a piece of art, whether I'm doing a business deal, there's a limit to what you're going to do. I don't think you want to pay just anything for a piece of art. And so I tend to be disciplined in that regard. And I think I was disciplined here. I because of my experiences in the art market, in the business world, I've learned to be very disciplined. And I hope that was reflected in how I handled the negotiations. No guarantee it was going to happen. I wanted it to happen, but not at the expense of making a bad deal for myself.
So that was the most businessy response that he had about Lindor. Everything else was about kind of the person. And you kind of stray away from the fact that he's an all-star shortstop, and you get into the fact that he's this face of the franchise type of guy. But I thought that answer was interesting, Andy.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to play it was the first public confirmation of this idea that I was quite confident was true through the process, which was that they never felt like they had to make this deal. They never felt like it. And they were planning on spending big money on somebody. Lindor had a leg up because he was already forming the relationship with the team and with the owner and with the owner's wife. I mean, those things are significant. These people are human beings. But that Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson will cut off their humanity at a certain point. If they don't, and in a situation like this, if they don't feel that the value is there, I'm sure it was difficult for Alderson to do this. It just goes against so many things that he believes in terms of how to build a baseball team. But he works for Cohen. The two of them seem to be very much in lockstep philosophically over, like, let's be very careful. Like, I can almost assure you that if Lindor, once the Mets came to him with the idea of $1 million more than Tatis, if he was like 350, they would have walked. The Mets would have walked. No, sorry, no Lindor. He leaves as a free agent next year. They try to get Corey Seager or something, or Trevor Story or whatever. I really believe that they would have walked away, and that's Cohen basically saying that.
Here's what both Cohen and Alderson had to say on, as we've talked about for months now, that drunken sailor spending.
Well, I said at the initial press conference that I wasn't going to, run around and spend money like a drunken sailor, right? I mean, Francisco is a special guy and deserved a special contract. Each situation we're going to evaluate differently. Sometimes when you tie yourself up into long-term deals, it potentially could hurt your flexibility in other areas, and we have to weigh that. So, we're going to be significant players for terrific, for free agents down the road, and we're going to act like a major market club.
Significantly early on in this conference, Steve said he's starting to get his sea legs, and it's tough to get your sea legs if you're a drunken sailor. And so I think Steve has done, a great job of navigating, these issues. And unfortunately, you often get measured by whether you sign a free agent or don't sign a free agent. There's so much else going on, the iceberg below the waterline, where we've made significant progress, and I think will contribute to what we can do longer term.
Wasn't it the iceberg below the waterline that eventually sunk the Titanic? So I'm not sure if Sandy's analogy there is exactly where he wanted, but I take his point.
Yeah, and you know what he had spoken about earlier in that news conference, the amount of hires in their front office, and talked about how it's basically unrecognizable. And it occurred to me during that answer, the iceberg below the waterline, that we don't get tweet alerts from you or Ken Rosenthal or Jeff Passan when they hire a new person in their analytics department or something like that. And we focus mostly on the roster, but if that part looks different too, that's going to help the Mets and their fans.
Yeah. Look, go on. Sorry, I thought you made a good point, and I just wanted to follow up on it.
Oh, that's so nice. I just, I thought the way Sandy Alderson talked about Steve Cohen goes to what you were just saying about their relationship, which is if Sandy Alderson were working for a guy worth $14 billion who was like, I don't care what it costs, Sandy, get me Trevor Bauer, George Springer, Francisco Lindor. Sandy would probably be an unhappy camper.
He probably doesn't take that job.
Well, maybe he takes it and it's a bait and switch and he's now working for a greedy owner.
Mm-hmm.
But you can tell by the way he talks about Steve Cohen that it's just a super rich guy who feels the same way he does about these negotiations.
Yeah, I would think Cohen probably wanted the player a little bit more than Alderson, or else it wouldn't have gotten done. Alderson wanted the player. He wanted the deal to get done. But his lifetime in baseball operations doesn't generally work this way. He's not the guy that wants to give out that contract. I think Cohen probably was more excited about making this statement and keeping the player, which is good. It worked out good. And Sandy responded to what his employer probably wanted him to do. That's his job. He reports to Cohen, obviously. What did you say that I wanted to interrupt and respond to? I have a little, as you know, brain fog situation going on here. Well, I know. It was what you said about how we're not like tweeting and reporting on, you're not getting alerts on this other below the iceberg stuff that goes on. And I think that's an indictment of how superficial my work is and my competitors' work is. And the commentary on BNNY and the whole thing, it is just the surface. And it really isn't like, oh, did they get Bauer or not? This is what I spend a month on. And really how you build an organization that's winning. And we've tried to make this point. East Coast Dodgers doesn't mean get the big money player. It means build the infrastructure. And we could probably make it more. And maybe every time they hire an analytics guy, I should tweet breaking, : We can make it a thing. But Sandy's right and you're right that our focus as in the media that we convey to the fans about how these organizations are constructed is quite narrow.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a fault of anyone's. I mean, we watch players play the game. So we don't watch people in cubicles do their jobs at Citi Field. So there's no reason and there's no reason for any fan at home to care more about that than the play on the field. We grow up playing baseball. We don't grow up coming up with lineups with analytics.
Yeah, but us reporters are stupid. It's all about the free agents, blah, blah, blah. Same thing.
Yeah, but again, you're catering to an audience that, 90% of which doesn't care about those hires.
Maybe we condition the audience to expect bad, superficial work from us. But anyway, next clip.
Okay, so Sandy Alderson was asked about players getting vaccinated, and I know, Andy, you wanted to put this in the show, and I thought his answer was thorough and interesting, and we'll finish with this. Let's take a listen.
The first and most important thing for us is providing the necessary education to our players. We want to encourage not only our players, but everyone to be vaccinated. I've been vaccinated, and I would encourage anybody in my family who hasn't been, who's not yet eligible to be vaccinated. So we're going to encourage our players to be vaccinated, but we're also going to provide education. So we will have something in Philadelphia for all of our players provided by medical staff, not our medical staff, independent medical staff, to try and inform players about the impact on their own health, on the health of their families, and specific questions that they may have. But we very definitely think it's important that we get as many of our players vaccinated as possible, and where there's concern, to address those concerns. But I'm hopeful that we will get a large number of our players vaccinated, as well as our additional traveling party. There are incentives for public health. There are incentives for the kinds to lift the kind of restrictions that they're faced with now. So there are lots of reasons, and hopefully we'll get as many players vaccinated as possible.
Yeah. Look, I think Sandy said that politely. And Andy, you've been covering him longer than I have, which was basically like, there's incentives, including people's health, and like it just seems so obvious, but I guess it's
I
not.
thought that tone and presentation was an example of very strong, seasoned leadership. Whatever he, you know what, I'm not even gonna say, like, I have no idea what he thinks privately about this issue. I can guess because he's an intelligent, like, thoughtful person, generally speaking, but his response wasn't to scold. His response was to provide further education, to say he basically understands if people are uncomfortable. So let's bring in further education. I thought it was a nice, meaningful touch for it to be outside medical staff. So there's no sense of team employees are pressuring you, team higher ups, training staff are pressuring you to do this medical decision. It's let's bring in some outside experts who can testify to why the science is very clear on this.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Shea Anything Podcast. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back with you Friday. Keith Hernandez joins us. He's now seen one game in the booth. He'll see a couple more before we talk to him, so that'll be interesting. And we look forward to it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you then.